taking action is going to be treated as an act of sheer stupidity or even corruption.
So, and that's the danger. So, when you said you wanted to see less of the government in the financial sector, what did you mean?
What I mean to say is that for many years we have insisted on the role of the government as important to foster inclusion, foster development across India. I think the public sector system has helped a little, but not in any way near what could be done if we enthuse the private sector system into doing it, right? And so, to my mind, the public sector systems could serve as a useful comparative fringe, but we need a greater mix of public and private. 70 public, 30 private seems to me too far weighted in favor of the public, especially because we're going to move to a situation where the banking system, financial system, has to think far more carefully about risks. When you have a bureaucrat who's protected by his government backing, and who's also threatened by the CAG and CBI inquiries, I don't see him making credit decisions, which this economy increasingly needs. That fine credit decision. Because right now he's responding to, we need more infrastructure, go lend to infrastructure projects. Okay, so he says, okay, government has sanctioned infrastructure, but you need the financial sector to tell which ones are the good ones and which ones are the bad ones. What we have is, in some sense, a situation where it's not doing enough of the evaluation. And that eventually could lead to corruption, it could lead to more sort of oligopolies, less competition, all those things aided and abetted by the public sector, and I think that's a worry.
Let's come to interest rates. With inflation and growth at about 7.5%, and the RBI is at about 3.25%. Is the RBI way behind the curve at the moment?
I think the RBI has to be extremely concerned at this point. I think concerned, not necessarily, I mean, some of the inflation that we see is obviously because of supply constraints of one kind or the other. For example, certain categories of food. But supply constraints for very visible products tend to create perceptions of inflation which are hard to erode and create higher inflationary expectations. You have high inflationary expectations, low nominal interest rates, you have abysmally low real interest rates, and you get a whole lot of activity happening which could at some point strain the economy.
Finally, one last question. The fisc. How worried are you about the fiscal deficit, 6.8%, 11% combined? We've got some of our stimulus is structural in nature in NREGA and the Sixth Pay Commission. So it really can't be rolled back. So how concerned are you? Do you see it reducing? Is 7.5% enough to bring it down to acceptable levels? What needs to be done?
I mean, my sense is growth will help, but I also think that we have to create space in case there are future emergencies. I mean, what I just talked about suggests that down the line, I mean, the global economy is adjusting, and as it adjusts, there will be accidents, and we have to create space for those potential accidents. The government as a buffer has proved particularly useful both in India but outside in the rest of the world when trouble came. If we are trying to maximize our use of the government's capacity, we're not going to have any left in case there are emergencies. So I think we start working on what we think are wasteful expenditures. The finance minister talked about fertilizer subsidy last budget. Certainly the petrol subsidy needs to be done yesterday. Need to be dealt with yesterday. But I think there are a whole bunch of expenditures which need to be looked at very carefully to see whether we can pull them back, both from the perspective of creating a buffer, but also in redirecting them to more useful, more inclusive expenditures, which we will need down the line.
You spoke about emergency to the global system. So in a sense, is 2010 going to be a year you're going to watch out for, look at very, very carefully? And what would these emergencies be, in a sense, would you get lead indicators in the form of macro numbers, or could they just spring up?
You know, they usually spring up. And this is why I say...
But are the numbers you'll be looking at? I mean, that could kind of give you a...
my sense is some economies are going to be under heavy stress later on in this year. I mean, we already have a bunch of emerging markets, Argentina, for example, which are coming under stress. We have Greece, which is an industrial economy, which is under heavy stress. To the extent that some of these countries start, getting into real trouble and maybe even defaulting, that could create shockwaves across the world. There could be many other sources. But also, remember, there's going to be interest rates which are hiked in industrial countries. How much of the flow into emerging markets has been a result of low interest rates? Some of it has been because, the emerging markets were resilient. But some of it is also a running away from industrial countries. When those rates are increased, what about the reverse flow? Do we have the capacity to sustain that? Those are the kinds of things we should be thinking about. And that is why I think we need capacity. And we shouldn't be too complacent about growth taking us out of it.
Professor Raghuram Rajan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Most welcome.